Good evening everyone, and as the joke goes, Happy World War III to those celebrating. Donald Trump opened with a line that sounded almost like a victory speech, calling himself a FIFA Peace Prize winner and a Nobel Peace Prize collector, joking about grabbing it like a trophy. That moment alone set the tone for what would become one of the most talked about political comedy segments in recent memory. What happened on Saturday Night Live wasn't just another political joke. The writers and performers, especially Colin Jost, delivered something sharper than satire. Instead of simply mocking the president, they placed his own words and past statements under the spotlight, allowing the audience to hear the contradictions directly. The result was a segment that people will likely keep discussing for a long time. On the morning of February 28, 2026, many Americans were just beginning their Saturday routines when Donald Trump posted a video on his platform announcing that the United States, alongside Israel, had begun military strikes against Iran. The operation was introduced with dramatic enthusiasm, almost as if he were unveiling a new project rather than announcing a military action in the Middle East. In the video, Trump explained that the U.S. military had launched major combat operations aimed at protecting Americans by eliminating what he described as imminent threats coming from the Iranian government. He characterized the regime as dangerous and hostile, accusing it of putting American forces, overseas bases, and allies around the world at risk. He also repeated a familiar argument, that for decades the Iranian leadership had chanted "Death to America" and had supported violence targeting American troops and interests. For supporters of the decision, this message framed the strikes as defensive. But for critics, the timing of the announcement raised immediate questions. The most surprising part was not only that such a large operation had been announced directly on social media, or that it appeared to begin without a formal vote from Congress. What really caught people's attention was something else entirely. The timing. Just 12 hours earlier, Bill Clinton had been sitting in front of the House Oversight Committee answering questions connected to the long-debated Jeffrey Epstein case. For years, the public had been demanding transparency about the so-called Epstein files, documents rumored to contain the names of powerful figures tied to the disgraced financier. During the hearing, Clinton faced a series of difficult questions, and the story quickly dominated headlines. But almost immediately after news of the Iran strikes broke, attention shifted. Some reporters observed that public interest in the Epstein documents suddenly dropped as the focus turned toward the developing military situation. That sudden shift sparked speculation across media and social platforms. People began asking whether the timing was coincidence or something more strategic. Critics openly questioned whether the military action had unintentionally, or deliberately, pulled the spotlight away from the controversial hearing. As the conversation around the timing grew louder, the speculation was no longer limited to commentators online. Even figures within the political establishment began raising questions. Some openly wondered what the sudden escalation with Iran might be diverting attention from. In interviews and television discussions, the phrase, "the Epstein files," kept coming up again and again. During one discussion, a commentator was asked directly what they believed the president might be trying to distract people from. The response came almost instantly, "the Epstein files." The comment was met with laughter from the audience, but it reflected a sentiment that had already begun circulating widely across political media. The irony was difficult to ignore for many observers. During the presidential campaign, Donald Trump and his running mate J.D. Vance had presented themselves as candidates focused on avoiding new foreign conflicts. They warned repeatedly that their opponents might drag the country into another war in the Middle East. Critics now pointed out that the situation unfolding with Iran appeared to contradict those earlier promises. For many Americans, the concern wasn't only about the politics behind the decision. There was also a deeper worry about the human cost. After 2 decades of military involvement across the Middle East, large portions of the public were exhausted by the idea of another conflict. People questioned whether American lives and billions of dollars would once again be committed overseas when domestic needs, housing, jobs, childcare, and healthcare, remained major challenges at home. What made the situation even more unusual was that the criticism wasn't coming solely from political opponents. It was also emerging from within the president's own party. One of the most prominent voices was Thomas Massie, a Republican congressman known for advocating strict limits on executive power. Massie had spent months pushing legislation designed to increase transparency around the Epstein case. Now he was proposing a resolution that would restrict the president's ability to initiate military action without explicit approval from Congress. Another surprising reaction came from Marjorie Greene, who had previously been one of Trump's most outspoken allies. She publicly criticized the situation, saying that for years many conservatives had demanded the full release of the Epstein files, yet the national conversation had suddenly shifted to the possibility of war with Iran. Her comments framed the situation as a move toward foreign regime change, language that sparked even more debate within the Republican Party itself. Watching from the outside, political observers noted how unusual it was to see such public disagreements among figures who had once appeared firmly aligned. While politicians argued in Washington and commentators debated on television, the writers at Saturday Night Live were watching everything unfold in real time, and they quickly realized that the story developing in front of them had all the elements of a powerful comedy segment. During one sketch, the show delivered a blunt joke that captured the entire debate in a single punchline. The line suggested that the sudden push toward war might serve one major purpose: distracting the public from the Epstein files. The audience laughed, but the joke landed because it echoed the same questions already circulating in political discussions. In classic SNL fashion, the writers had condensed a complex political controversy into a single sharp line that viewers could immediately understand, and that moment set the stage for what would become one of the most talked about segments of the night. What made the situation even more remarkable was the timing behind it all. Saturday Night Live had just returned from a month-long break during the Winter Olympics. The writers had spent weeks preparing material, most likely planning sketches around the week's political events, including the president's major address to the nation. But everything changed in the early hours of the very day the show was scheduled to air. At around 2 a.m., news broke that American and Israeli aircraft were operating inside Iranian airspace. Reports spread quickly across media outlets, and suddenly the entire political conversation shifted overnight. The supreme leader of Iran was reportedly dead, and the writers in the SNL offices suddenly had only a handful of hours to scrap their prepared material and build an entirely new opening for the show. That rapid pivot led to one of the night's most memorable moments. Comedian James Austin Johnson, who is known for portraying Donald Trump on the program, stepped in front of the cameras and began the cold open with a line that immediately set the tone: "Happy World War III to everyone celebrating." On the surface, it sounded like a simple exaggerated joke, the kind of absurd greeting that late-night comedy sometimes uses to break tension. But the humor carried a deeper implication. The line hinted directly at the growing concern that the world might be sliding into a wider conflict. Later in the show, the focus shifted to the Weekend Update desk, where Colin Jost delivered one of the most talked-about segments of the night. Sitting calmly behind the desk with his usual composed delivery, Jost began by joking that the president's recent actions might hurt his chances of receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, especially since Trump had frequently claimed credit for ending conflicts around the world. Then Jost introduced something unexpected. Instead of launching into a traditional punchline, he played an archival clip from 2011 showing Trump speaking during an interview at Trump Tower. In the video, Trump argued that Barack Obama might one day start a war with Iran as a political distraction. The clip played for the audience, showing Trump confidently explaining that he believed such a move would be a tactic used to shift public attention. When the video ended, Jost looked directly into the camera and delivered a dry, perfectly timed line: "Yeah, that's the Trump I voted for." The studio erupted with laughter. The reason the moment landed so strongly was because it didn't rely on exaggeration. Jost simply placed the past statement beside the present situation and allowed the audience to draw their own conclusions. That approach is what makes Jost's style stand out among political comedians. Rather than crafting elaborate punchlines, he often builds jokes by highlighting real quotes, archived footage, and documented history. By doing so, he lets the contradictions speak for themselves. His co-anchor Michael Che followed up with another observation about the unfolding situation. Che pointed out that the president had reportedly launched the strikes without a congressional vote, something that raised serious questions about authority and oversight. Then Che delivered a punchline that summed up the debate in a single sentence. After asking who had actually approved the operation, he joked that the answer seemed obvious: Benjamin Netanyahu. The joke worked because it touched on several political tensions at once. It referenced the lack of congressional authorization, highlighted the close relationship between the U.S. and Israel's leadership, and reduced a complex geopolitical debate into a simple, biting line. In that moment, the Weekend Update segment captured exactly what the show does best, turning complicated political developments into humor that feels both sharp and strangely revealing. While the sketches on Saturday Night Live were sharp and memorable, the reality unfolding in Washington often seemed even stranger than the comedy. In many ways, the writers barely needed to exaggerate anything, because the events themselves were already unusual enough. Just a couple of days later, on March 2, 2026, Donald Trump hosted a Medal of Honor ceremony at the White House. Normally, such ceremonies are solemn moments meant to recognize extraordinary bravery and sacrifice by American service members. It's the kind of event where presidents typically speak carefully and focus entirely on honoring the soldiers and their families, but but during the ceremony, Trump briefly shifted the conversation to something unexpected. While looking around the room, he pointed toward the curtains and began talking about renovations happening at the White House. He described plans for construction, mentioning that behind the drapes there was currently a deep space that would eventually become part of a new building extension. He continued discussing the project, explaining how the future structure would look impressive once completed. At one point, he even joked about potentially saving money on doors because the decorative curtains looked so good. He added that he had personally selected the drapes during his first term and that he had always liked the color gold. The remarks then shifted again toward the construction itself. Trump spoke about the loud pile drivers working on the project, noting that they operated early in the morning and late into the evening. He mentioned that Melania Trump wasn't particularly fond of the noise, though he personally said he enjoyed the sound, describing it as something he found satisfying. For critics watching the ceremony, the moment felt strangely out of place. Several commentators pointed out that the remarks came during a ceremony meant to honor fallen soldiers connected to the ongoing Iran operation. Among those reacting strongly was Tammy Duckworth, who spoke critically about the tone of the event. Moments like that are part of what often fuels political satire. In fact, they illustrate a point many writers at Saturday Night Live have made repeatedly. Sometimes the real world already contains all the material they need. The show even joked about the timing of the strikes themselves. One line suggested the operation began in the early hours of Saturday for two strategic reasons. First, because financial markets would be closed for the weekend, and second, because it would send the SNL writers' room into complete chaos as they rushed to rewrite the show overnight. The episode also referenced the president's recent State of the Union address, which had taken place earlier that week. During that nearly 2-hour speech, Trump confidently declared that the nation was stronger and more successful than ever before. When Colin Jost repeated that line during Weekend Update, bigger, better, and stronger than ever before, he paused briefly before delivering the punchline, same thing the measles said. The audience laughed, though the joke carried a layer of real-world context. At the time, reports had indicated a rise in measles cases across parts of the country. Jost delivered the line calmly, almost like a news anchor reading a routine update, which made the punchline land even harder. That style is exactly what has made Weekend Update such a powerful platform for political commentary. Rather than shouting or exaggerating, Jost often takes a quieter approach, highlighting a single quote, statistic, or archived clip that reveals the larger story. In many ways, that's the central point of the entire episode. The writers didn't need to invent outrageous scenarios or imaginary dialogue. Much of the material already existed in real speeches, interviews, and news footage, and once those moments are captured on television, they become part of the permanent record. Clips from the episode were quickly shared across social media, circulating through group chats, short-form videos, and online discussions. Even people who didn't watch the broadcast live eventually saw the highlights. That's something modern political figures can't easily escape. A post on Truth Social might reach supporters, and threats against networks like NBC may make headlines. But once a moment is recorded and uploaded online, it continues to live far beyond the original broadcast. Every sketch remains archived. Every Weekend Update segment is still available online, and each clip continues circulating long after the original Saturday night broadcast has ended. In the end, that may be the most powerful element of political comedy today, not just the jokes themselves, but the way those moments are preserved, replayed, and shared with audiences who might not have even been watching in the first place.